When my granddaughter whispered that my own children were secretly dividing up my estate before I was even gone, I pretended not to hear. But I was already rewriting my will, and what I left them in the end made them beg me for forgiveness in front of the whole family. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. My name is Walter. I am 76 years old, a widower, and a grandfather of 3. For most of my life, my pride has been the family orchard outside Sacramento, 40 acres of apricot and cherry trees that my late wife, Martha, and I built from the ground up. It was not inherited land, not some silver spoon acreage passed down from wealthy parents. No, Martha and I bought it in the spring of 1972 with a loan that nearly broke us before we even began. The soil was dry, the barn half-rotted, and there were nights when the only thing we ate was fruit too bruised to sell at the roadside stand. But we kept going. Every row of trees, every fence post hammered into the earth, every stone cleared by hand, that was our life's work. I still remember the way Martha's face looked the first time the blossoms came in thick enough to perfume the air. She laughed like a young girl, twirling among the rows, pink petals falling into her hair. I knew then that the orchard wasn't just a piece of land, it was our marriage made visible, every struggle and every joy written into those trees. When our first son, Daniel, was born, I planted a cherry tree near the old irrigation ditch, just for him. When Peter came along 2 years later, he got an apricot tree at the edge of the hill. And when our daughter, Grace, arrived much later, Martha chose a peach tree, saying it reminded her of the softness of a baby's cheek. For decades, those trees grew as our children did. I thought, perhaps naively, that one day they would feel the same devotion to the land that their mother and I did. Martha and I used to walk the rows in the evenings, her hand tucked into mine, talking about the future. One day, she'd say, looking out over the trees heavy with fruit, our children will carry this forward. They'll love it as much as we do. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But children dream differently than parents. It started with something so small, so ordinary, that I almost convinced myself it was nothing. I had gone to the garage one evening to put away tools and, when I came back inside, I found Daniel standing in my office with the desk drawers half open. He jumped when he saw me in the doorway, though he recovered quickly, flashing that same boyish grin he'd always used to talk his way out of trouble when he was young. "Dad! You startled me," he laughed, closing the drawer with a casual thud. "I was just looking for that old photograph, you know, the one of us with Grandpa by the tractor. Thought it might be nice to show Lily for her school project." The explanation sounded practiced. Too smooth. My office was lined with framed pictures, albums stacked neatly on the bookshelf. Why would he go digging through private drawers? "Did you find it?" I asked slowly. He shook his head, too quickly. "No luck. Maybe next time." And with that, he clapped me on the shoulder and left the room. I stood there for a long while after he'd gone, listening to his footsteps fade down the hall. Something gnawed at me. My office had always been my private space, a place my children respected growing up. Daniel had never gone into my drawers without asking, not once. When I finally sat down at the desk, the air smelled faintly of his cologne, sharp and citrusy. I opened the drawer he'd been rifling through and noticed immediately what was missing, the slim leather folder that held my will. I kept it there, always in the same spot, alongside property records and insurance papers. Now it was gone. I searched the desk, the filing cabinet, even the shelf where Martha used to keep her recipe cards, but it wasn't there. The next morning, it reappeared, tucked neatly back in place, as though it had never moved at all. But I knew better. The edges of the folder were bent, as if handled too roughly, and the papers inside were not as I had left them. That was the moment my stomach first turned against me. 2 weeks later, during Sunday dinner, the suspicion hardened into certainty. The table was set the way Martha always liked, roast chicken, green beans with almonds, the good china. I excused myself to fetch a bottle of wine from the cellar. On my way back up the stairs, voices drifted down the hall. Daniel's wife, Sarah, was leaning close to him, her words a hushed hiss but clear enough to slice through the clink of dishes and the laughter of the grandchildren. "If your father doesn't last another year," she whispered, "the orchard alone will cover the lake house and college for both kids. We should start making plans now." Plans. That word hit me harder than any insult ever could. Her tone wasn't concerned about my health, wasn't trembling with fear of losing a father-in-law. It was brisk, calculated, the way a businesswoman might discuss profits in a boardroom. My orchard, my life's work with Martha, had been reduced to a figure on a balance sheet. I froze halfway up the stairs, gripping the banister so tightly my knuckles whitened. My heart thudded in my chest, though not from age. From rage. Profit margins. That's what they were whispering about while I poured the wine that had once been saved for anniversaries. And for the first time in my life, I looked at my own son not as the boy I had raised, but as a man planning for my absence before I was even gone. And then came the moment that burned everything into certainty, an ember pressed straight into my chest. Dinner had ended, the plates cleared, the children excused from the table. The adults lingered with coffee and brandy, voices weaving in and out of polite conversation laced with undertones I could hear but not yet name. Lily padded back into the room, still in her little yellow dress patterned with cherries, the one Martha would have adored. She smelled faintly of sugar cookies and crayons as she climbed into my lap, her skinny arms circling my neck like she'd done since she was a toddler. For a brief moment, I let myself relax. Holding her against me felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She was 10 years old, with Martha's same dimple in her left cheek, and the way she nestled into me reminded me that innocence still lived somewhere in this family. But children, with their honesty, carry truths they don't even realize they're delivering. She tilted her head up to me, eyes wide and guileless. Then, with the quiet seriousness only children can muster, she whispered, "Grandpa, Mommy said you don't need all those trees anymore. She said soon they'll be ours." The words didn't sound cruel coming from her, they were just words, delivered like a secret, like she was sharing a piece of gossip from the schoolyard. But in that instant, I felt my heart drop into a pit so deep it rattled my bones. I swallowed hard, forcing my face into a mask of calm. "Is that so, Lily?" I asked gently, brushing a stray strand of hair from her forehead. She nodded eagerly, her curls bouncing. "Mommy said the orchard is too much for you now. That Daddy will know what to do with it when it's his. She said you'll be happier when you don't have to worry about it anymore." I kissed her forehead, because that is what a grandfather does. I told her she had nothing to worry about, that Grandpa would always make sure she was safe. My voice was steady, my smile soft, because I would never let her carry the weight of what she'd just said. But inside, something cold and jagged hardened. It wasn't her fault, she was just a child repeating what she heard at the dinner table when she was supposed to be coloring in the living room. Yet hearing it from her lips made it undeniable. Children don't invent greed. They overhear it, they absorb it, they carry it forward like an echo from the next room. And in that echo, I heard the truth, my own blood, the children Martha and I had raised, were already stripping my orchard down to numbers and possessions. They weren't waiting for me to die, they were rehearsing for it. I held Lily tighter than I should have, as though clutching her might anchor me to something good in a world that suddenly felt poisoned. She wriggled and giggled, unaware of the storm she had just unleashed inside me. By the time she slid off my lap and ran to join her cousins, my mind was no longer soft with family memories. It was sharp, focused. The orchard had survived droughts, pests, freezes, and fires. And now it would have to survive its own heirs. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet of the house, I realized, I was no longer just a father or a grandfather. I was the last guardian of Martha's dream. And I would not let it be trampled by the very people who should have protected it. Something inside me had broken. Something else had been forged. That night, sleep never even came close. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching the faint glow of the moon shift across the plaster. Every creak of the old house felt like Martha's footsteps, every shadow across the orchard seemed to lean toward me, asking, "What will you do now?" I got up around midnight and padded barefoot to my office. The house was silent, except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out old files, spreading them across the oak surface like puzzle pieces. There were deeds for the land, yellowed contracts from the 1970s when we bought the first parcel, maps of irrigation lines drawn in Martha's neat handwriting. And tucked among them were school photos, report cards, notes in childish scrawl from Daniel and Peter and Grace. "Happy Father's Day, Daddy. I love you." The sight of those crooked letters made my throat tighten. I had kept them all these years, proof that once upon a time, my children had loved me without condition. Proof that greed was not something we are born with, but something we choose. I traced Martha's handwriting on the contracts with my fingertip. She had signed every one alongside me, her name steady where mine sometimes shook from exhaustion. I could almost hear her voice whispering what she used to say when times were hard: "Walter, the orchard is ours because we fight for it. If we don't protect it, no one else will." By dawn, I had made my decision. The moment the sun cracked the horizon, I was on the phone to my lawyer, a man I'd known for 40 years. His voice was groggy with sleep when he picked up, but when I told him what I needed, he didn't hesitate. "I'll draft everything today, Walter. You're doing the right thing." The right thing. Strange how those words can sound like both salvation and damnation at once. For the next month, I played the part they expected of me. I was the quiet grandfather in the corner chair, smiling at Lily's drawings, nodding along when Peter talked about his new business venture, listening while Daniel prattled on about his future projects for the orchard, as if he already held the keys to it. I sat through every conversation, stone-faced and gentle, even when my gut churned. I let them believe I was old and distracted, too weary to notice the way they calculated their future in square footage and dollar signs. But while they whispered about their plans, the real plan was unfolding without them. The will in my desk drawer, the one Daniel had once pulled out and studied in secret, was no longer the document he thought it was. Every last word had been rewritten, every clause sharpened with intention. And every acre, every tree, every penny of Martha's and my life's work was now locked away beyond their reach. When Martha died, I promised her two things. I stood by her grave with the smell of earth in the air and swore, would take care of the orchard. And I would take care of the grandchildren. She never told me to protect the children from themselves. She never asked me to shield them from their own appetites, their own foolish hunger for things they hadn't earned. But as I sat at that desk night after night, listening to the orchard groan in the winter wind, I understood what she would have wanted. She loved them too much to see them destroy themselves, and I loved her too much to let her dream die in their hands. So that is exactly what I did. The weeks that followed felt like walking a tightrope no one else could see. On the surface, I was the same Walter they thought they knew, gentle, forgetful, content to sit in my chair by the window with a book I barely read. But beneath that stillness, every word they spoke cut sharper, every glance between them weighed heavier. One Sunday, Daniel came by the orchard early, before the rest of the family. He stood on the porch, hands on his hips, surveying the trees like a man already taking inventory. "You know, Dad," he said, gesturing at the rows, "if we clear out that north section, we could expand parking. Put in a little roadside cafe, maybe even a wine-tasting stand. It would double profits." I nodded slowly, eyes on the horizon. "Sounds ambitious." He chuckled, clapping me on the shoulder as though I had given approval. But in my mind, I saw him tearing down the cherry trees Martha had loved best, turning her blossoms into asphalt. Another evening, Grace visited with her husband. They sat in the living room, sipping the brandy I poured. She leaned toward him when she thought I wasn't listening. "If Dad just handed over the management now, we could restructure before spring. Think of what we'd save." Her husband murmured agreement, and Grace's eyes darted to me, testing. I smiled back at her and asked if she wanted more brandy. She flushed, caught, but said nothing. And then there was Peter, less subtle, more careless. One afternoon, while the grandchildren played in the yard, he joked loudly, "When the orchard's ours, I'm putting in a pool. Finally get some use out of this place." His laughter rang across the rows, though no one else found it funny. I laughed with him anyway. Even raised my glass. That was my role now, the harmless old man, too tired to argue, too sentimental to resist. Inside, I was stone. At night, after they left, I'd walk the orchard paths alone. The wind would whip through the branches, and I'd whisper to Martha what I couldn't say aloud, "They think you built this for them to sell, love. They don't know yet that you built it for something greater. For the little ones. For the future that still deserves it." The mask grew heavier each day, but I wore it gladly. Because the more convinced they became of my weakness, the sweeter their shock would be when the truth came crashing down on them. Thanksgiving arrived cold that year, the kind of brittle November air that made the orchard look like a cathedral of bare branches. Inside the house, though, everything gleamed, the long oak dining table polished, Martha's china set out, the smell of turkey and rosemary filling every corner. The grandchildren ran through the halls with laughter. Their parents smiled stiffly, pretending at holiday warmth, but I could see the calculations behind their eyes. They were waiting for the day this house, this orchard, this life, passed into their hands. I let them wait a little longer. When the turkey was carved, the plates filled, and the first glasses of wine poured, I stood at the head of the table. My chair had always been Martha's favorite place for me to sit, so I lingered there, a hand resting on the back. "Before we begin," I said, my voice carrying over the clatter of forks, "I have something to share." Daniel raised his glass already, grinning. "A toast from Dad. About time." Grace smiled too, expectant. Peter leaned back in his chair, smirking. They thought they knew the script, that I would speak of gratitude, of family, of Martha's memory. Instead, I opened the folder in my hand. "Since you're all so eager to discuss my future," I said evenly, "I thought I'd share it with you. My estate has been settled. The orchard, the house, the savings, they are spoken for." Smiles flickered across their faces like sparks catching kindling. Daniel even leaned forward, the grin widening. But then I paused. I let the silence stretch until the ticking of the old grandfather clock filled the room. "None of it," I continued, "is for you." The room froze. The words dropped like stones in water, and the ripples of shock spread across every face. Grace blinked rapidly, her fork clattering against her plate. "What do you mean, Dad?" Peter sat forward sharply. "You can't just." "I can," I interrupted, my voice calm as steel. And I did. I laid copies of the new will across the table, the paper stark white against the dark wood. Every last acre, every last dollar, placed into a trust for the grandchildren, untouchable until they turned 25. Managed by a foundation outside the family. Not a penny for their parents to squander. Daniel's face drained of color. His wife gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. Grace's hands trembled as she scanned the document, her lips parting in disbelief. This isn't fair," she stammered. "After everything we've done for you. Everything you've done for me." My voice rose, not in anger, but in clarity. "You've whispered about profits, about houses, about what you would take once I was gone. Not one of you spoke of stewardship. Not one of you spoke of legacy. Only Lily did, without even meaning to." Lily sat at the end of the table, eyes wide, clutching her napkin. She looked at me as though I were a knight in some storybook, not an old man with tired bones. Peter shoved back his chair, his face red. "You can't cut us out like this. We're your children." I leaned toward him, my hands braced on the table. "And what does it mean to be my children? To scheme over my grave before I'm even in it?" Daniel slammed his fist down, rattling the silverware. "You'll regret this." His voice cracked with something between rage and desperation. "No," I said softly, meeting his eyes. "The only regret in this room belongs to you. Because one day your children will read this will, and they will know the truth, that their parents valued money over their grandfather's life." The silence that followed was brutal. Grace's face was blotched with tears. Peter's jaw clenched like he might break his teeth. Daniel looked at the documents as though they might dissolve if he glared hard enough. And then the begging began. Pleas layered over arguments, shouts over sobs. They swore they hadn't meant it, that it was all a misunderstanding, that they loved me, that they could change. But the words came too late. I sat down finally, lifting my glass of wine. My voice was low, steady, as I said, "This is what it means to love family. Not to strip it apart before it's even cold in the ground." The grandchildren stared, silent and wide-eyed, as the grown-ups around them unraveled. And in their silence, I saw Martha smiling at me from some unseen place, because her orchard, her dream, her legacy, would bloom for them. That was the last Thanksgiving we all spent together. The weeks after Thanksgiving were a storm. The phone calls started first. Daniel's voice, loud and frantic, demanding I come to my senses. Grace left voicemails that swung between pleading and scolding, sometimes within the same minute. Peter didn't call at all, but his wife did, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Surely there's a way we can revisit this, Walter. Families don't treat each other like this. Families." The word tasted like ash coming from her mouth. Then came the letters from lawyers. Pages of accusations, claims that I'd been coerced, that I wasn't in sound mind, that someone must have manipulated me. I sat at my desk, reading each one in silence, and signed my own attorney's responses with a steady hand. My lawyer had expected as much. "They'll fight it," he'd said. "But they'll lose. You've left nothing open to challenge." And lose they did. When the judge upheld the will as airtight, Daniel's face flushed the same red I remembered from his childhood tantrums. Grace stormed out of the courtroom, her heels echoing like gunshots. Peter sat there pale, stunned, as if the ground beneath him had given way. The trust stood. Every acre, every dollar, sealed away for the grandchildren. Beyond their reach. After that, the silence settled in. Calls stopped. Visits ended. My children, my blood, cut me out of their lives, as though the orchard had been the only tether between us. But on Saturdays, Lily and the other grandchildren still came bounding down the orchard rows, their laughter threading through the bare branches like birdsong. We picked apples from the late-blooming trees, baked pies in the old kitchen, and I told them stories about Martha, how she sang when she worked, how she planted rosemary by the porch because she loved the smell on her hands. They listened, wide-eyed, their innocence untouched by the bitterness their parents carried. One afternoon, I found Lily standing at the edge of the orchard, staring out at the rows of trees. "Grandpa," she said softly, "are these really going to be ours someday?" I knelt beside her, my knees aching but my voice steady. "Yes, sweetheart. But more than that, they'll always be a part of you. These trees aren't just ours. They're our family's story." She smiled, and for a heartbeat, Martha's dimple lit her face. The children, their parents, rarely came anymore. That was fine. I had made peace with it. Let them sulk in their new houses, calculating profits that would never come. Let them call me cruel, vindictive, stubborn. The orchard still bloomed every spring. And when I walked through it, hearing the grandchildren's laughter carried on the wind, I knew I had kept my promises. Martha's legacy was safe. And one day, when the grandchildren were old enough to read the truth for themselves, they would know exactly who had chosen greed, and who had chosen them.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.